So the way that kind of the AI works, it needs to know two things: how the biomanufacturing on a scale works, how the biomanufacturing of this specific vector works. So if it sees both of them and sees enough tech transfer, it starts growing this intuition to what are the things that need to be changed. So it's like you're getting a vector and zooming in, and it knows how exactly which element zooms in. And we are going to see more and more of that. The AI going to be more helpful.
What if we could make life-saving drugs as accessible as smartphones? Today's guest believes we are on the cusp of a biomanufacturing revolution that will do exactly that. Meet Reza Farahani, who is the founder and CEO of Catalyze AI, who is leveraging artificial intelligence to slash drug development timelines from years to months. From predicting cell behavior to optimizing production processes, discover how AI is transforming biologics manufacturing from an art into a science. Get ready for a mind-bending journey into the future of biotech. Are you juggling the complexities of CMC development while trying to enjoy the beauty of biotech? Have you ever wondered if there's a way to simplify bioprocessing? Welcome to the Smart Biotech Scientist Podcast, where we're diving headfirst into the very challenges you face. We're breaking it down, demystifying the jargon, and giving you the keys to unlock your full potential. I'm your host, David Brühlmann, and I get it. With 15 plus years in the biotech industry, I face the same challenges you do. There's a way to simplify and streamline so you can remove complexity, you can skip trials and errors, deliver without delay your groundbreaking therapy to clinics and market, and still enjoy every single step. Do you want to learn how industry experts and I did it? Grab a cup of coffee and your favorite notebook and pen. Now is the time to take your bioprocessing game to the next level. Let's smarten up biotech. Welcome, Reza, to the Smart Biotech Scientist Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
It's a pleasure. Reza, share something that you believe about bioprocess development that most people disagree with.
That's a good start. I don't know if a lot of people disagree with that or not, but I think about biomanufacturing the same way that we are like thinking about the computation. When you think about computers in the 1960s, we were using it only for sending people to the moon, calculating these trajectories and stuff. And today, everyone in our pocket, we have a computer that is stronger than what we use for Apollo 11. I think we are in that stage of biomanufacturing. We are using biomanufacturing, synthetic biology right now to make expensive products, usually like therapeutics, for oncology, to cure cancer, to doing this stuff. But in future, when the price drops, that become more common, we are going to see our everyday products around us. Could be leather, gelatin, milk, everything like that going to be produced biomanufacturing. And we are not far from it, I would say. Maybe less than a decade or two at most.
Yeah, that's really exciting. The prospects of being able to produce everything inside a cell. So I'm really excited today's conversation, Reza. But first of all, let's dive into your fascinating journey. What was the first spark that ignited your passion for biotech, and how did that lead you to revolutionizing bioprocess development?
So when I was I came from AI background. I was coding in GPUs, buying NVIDIA GPUs in 2015, coding with it. So that inherently my background come from doing AI. And what I was looking at every point is what are the most complex problems that we can solve with AI with the most amount of impact. A couple of years ago, after I sold my previous startup, I was thinking about that one. And it's like the different problems we have in the real world and what's going to be like the most impactful in the next couple of decades. I came to this biomanufacturing problem. I had some exposure doing some consulting work, and I know the impact is very huge. Funny enough, I was talking to a friend of mine who was PhD in biomanufacturing, biology, biochemistry. And after a couple of years of working in pharma, he'll quit fully. And it's like, I cannot do this anymore. And I was talking to him. When you think about biomanufacturing, you are living with a live organism, and that live organism is inherently complex and unpredictable to work with. When you are thinking about making aspirin is 20 atoms, but insulin is like thousands of atoms. And when you think about the new biologics, there are 20,000 of atoms. The Keytruda, like oncology, like for Merck, it's like 20,000 atoms. They're very, very complex to predict how the cell is going to produce these complex molecules. I was thinking about that. It's like we haven't done anything to simplify that. Biomanufacturing is inherently complex. The way that you code the cell, the way that you extract it, genius after genius moves. So it's very complex in the hand of very few organizations. And at the same time, we were in the boom of AI. I'm talking about computationally, algorithmically. And I was putting these two together as, hey, this is a complex problem. Today, we have the computation power to solve it. Today, we have the algorithmic power to solve it. We just need to bring the data together, then we can improve it. At the end of the day, the goal for me is to democratize it. It wouldn't be like, you probably know the gap between even the top academia and the top pharma about the bioprocesses, knowing the in and outs of process development is huge. Even the top universities don't know as much of industry, what's happening there. So if we take that knowledge and democratizing it, how good that could be. And that's where we can start reducing the cost. Is a very similar open sourcing like operating system. What happened? I don't know if you guys know about the Windows versus Linux. Democratizing it, you give it to the hand of a lot of people. So that's the thought process behind it. I think there is so much is happening and we are in the verge to have the capability to do so.
So was the spark that led you to starting Catalyze AI, this conversation, these reflections on where you can make the biggest impact, or how did that come along?
Yeah, then I start thinking about that and I start talking to more and more people. That was the conversation. I was talking to people working in a big pharma, talking to people who have dozens of patents about biomanufacturing, different stuff. In Catalyze, we have a good set of advisors, like we have executive from Pfizer, bringing new therapeutics. So that became a bigger conversation for me. It's like, hey, talking to these people, finding where the gaps are. I started thinking about it, when we are going to do that, probably we are also going to start with the therapeutic area, because that's where most of the biomanufacturing today is happening. So that kind of narrowed it down to biologics manufacturing. And we start thinking about it. We started with vaccines. Then we started working on cell and gene therapy. So it's like getting a niche, conquer it, going to the next one, going to the next one. And at the end, at the same time, building this AI model that could be transformed from one location to another. And the idea behind it is if you find a new therapeutic, it can take 18 months, 200 runs to find out develop a process to find out what's the optimal condition to do it. Can we do that in dozens, in months, like in couple months, 20 runs, I find the optimal condition. I find what is the good media composition, what's a good strain of host, what's good temperature to do the incubation, all of that one. Like you hired your top scientist that done this process millions of times, and that person comes into your lab and do it for you. So instead of going through that experimentation, and that's how good that would be. Hundreds of therapeutic companies that's coming out to the market and they go to the valley of death of process development. You can save them. How much the cycle of drug development going to be faster? And that was the idea. And that's where we kicked it off.
That's amazing. And this leads us to the nut we want to crack. As I was looking at your website, there's something that stood out. I love your mission and your mission to make life-saving drugs accessible and affordable for everyone. And I think that's exactly a big issue. And you already alluded to it. Process development costs are high. Manufacturing costs are high. And because of that, yeah, we know, especially in the cell and gene therapy, we have amazing therapies, but they're just not accessible. And because they're not affordable. So what inspired your mission to go after that target and to make manufacturing and development much more cost effective?
What I mentioned before, I think actually biologics manufacturing is just not a drug production. We are thinking about like the whole future. Like if I can make like milk casein, and today we have the technology, we know how to make casein like in milk protein through biologics. It's just, you cannot compete with the cows at this point, but definitely it's possible. But if you do it on a scale, you're going to use 90% less water, 60% less energy to make that protein through biomanufacturing rather than having a cow. So it's like, how much sustainable is it? How much better is it? So the vision that was very intriguing. And bringing the cost of the drugs, the therapeutic down, that's very intriguing. Everywhere you look at it, there are so many applications here that if you think about, if I want to do 5 things that fundamentally impact the world in the next decade or so, definitely one of them could be like bringing the cost of biologics manufacturing low. If we do that, we don't need to go to Mars and escape Earth because we are ruining it. Because we can make stuff cheaper, sustainable. We can feed billions of people. Like it's going to be like a lot of stuff going to get solved rather than finding these ridiculous solutions to bring sustainability or climate change. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So tell us now how you're going to solve this using AI, specifically in your company. How are you going to help us scientists optimize and develop bioprocesses so that they're better, more cost-effective, more robust, and we can get to the final process much quicker?
So when you think about biologics, it's just manufacturing. It is both complex and convoluted. There are many steps in it, and each steps have a lot of degree of complexity. At this point, it's not intuitive for someone to understand, hey, this is the right thing to do at any stage. I'll give you an example. If you have a biofermentation tank, the pressure of the air pressure, like today is cloudy, the other day is not, can impact your production. So this is something that you need a lot of data and complex models to understand all the aspects that can impact your production. And AI is really good at that, can focus on something and can do it. The way we are doing it, we are using this thing called a transformer model. To double click on that, the transformer model is the same thing that you are using on ChatGPT. It's like guessing the next word, that kind of like a situation. That's a fundamental of it. But they're using transformer. What they did, they feed a lot of text data to it so it can probabilistically guess the next step. Now imagine that in your biomanufacturing, you can bring everything to pieces that are very, very small, like your cell growth, expression, but in time horizon of few seconds. If I guess what would be the next step, I can predict and model the whole production. So when I'm sitting here and I say, hey, I want to produce this vector, it has that ratio of C and G's and A's and T's, and pass it to the model can spit out, by historically seeing so many vectors that have been produced in the past, what is the right host for you? What is the right strain of E. coli to use it? And at the end, you're getting a protein expression, what type of amino acid you need in your media, all of that together. So the AI, by seeing repetitively a lot of this, can start your whole production. And that doesn't matter if you have a 5-liter tank or a 50-liter tank or a 500-liter tank. So that wouldn't matter. At the end of the day, we are training this AI model that at every step of manufacturing can predict what's going to happen in next for a long term. So you give it your initial vector and it can spit out in a 0 shot what are the right conditions. With a few shots, you're going to get so much better, giving you a starting point and guiding you through the process of developing the product.
What is your strategy regarding the training of the model? Do you have to start from scratch with every different client because they have different cell lines or different media? Or do you create a library? Can you transfer the knowledge you have acquired already?
We have a library for some cases, but for some cases, you can start extracting features about that cell line or start extracting specific information about the vectors, for example. But when you think about it, about the host, you have HeLAs, you have yeast, you have E. coli. So at the end of the day, the variety on the microbial host is pretty limited. There are variations here and there, but in general, they're pretty similar. So you don't need to start from scratch every time, as long as you have a feature set that describes that cell line for you. That would be the case. If we have seen it before, that cell line, you are going to have 0 shot. If you haven't seen it, you are going to have a few shot learning. That's what I would say. Like now you have instead of a 200 run, you need to have a dozen. So it depends how new is that to the model. Sometimes it spit out right away. Sometimes it takes a few runs to learn.
Yeah, this reminds me of a conversation I had a few months ago with Professor Morbidelli, and they noticed that going from one vaccine candidate to another, they were able to skip up to, I think, 80% of the experiments. And then even from hosts that were not related at first glance, still they were able to transfer up to 50% of the previous knowledge, which is impressive. So that shows the power of these models.
At the end of the day, think about this one. You have an E. coli, you have dozens of strains, but all of them, they're going to die at 60 degrees and they're going to be inactive at 20. So if the model knows that, doesn't need to learn it. But if you have nothing in it, you need to teach that model even these basic information about the biology. So that's after a while, the model starts picking up that intuition about the biophysics. That's what we call it, the new biophysics model. So it has an understanding how the biophysics works. You're learning a space, your feasibility, like a space becomes smaller and smaller. So the model would be able to learn quicker. So think about this one as if you hire a new grad from like university or someone who worked at the industry 20 years, if they see a new cell line, I'm pretty sure the one who worked at the 20 years have a better guess where to start the process development than the new grad. So that the intuition was going to be embedded into the model.
Using AI, where have you seen the most benefit? Because cell culture is complex. You have so many parameters to optimize. You want to have a higher yield. There is product quality, for instance, glycosylation pattern or whatever, charge variants. There is the media components. You want to improve certain metabolisms. Where did you see the biggest impact right now, actually, through your models?
Interesting. When you think about it, I always say like, hey, think about it at 3 steps. Your human element, you have your raw material, you have your processes. And the human element like gonna do the initial condition and everything there. Where we started was raw material. And that was pretty useful because we start thinking about the raw material. You're getting like a beta alanine that has some amount of amino nitrogen. Or it was really interesting. That one a human can read, but like a spectrometry. It's so hard to read for a human to understand what's that graph is. But you can apply a Fourier transform to that one, extract some feature, pass it to the model. You're just going above the human capability about reading what are the impurities. That was our first use case. We started doing that. We knew there is something. And it was so interesting when we talked to scientists, a lot of the stuff or the people on the shop floors, they knew intuitionally, I see whenever we buy this material and it looks like this, we are getting a worse result. But they didn't have the statistical behind it to prove it. So some of the stuff actually we showed, it was aligned with the human intuition at the end. But the proof wasn't there. So there were no action taken on it. You cannot say, hey, I think this is happening. So that was the first one, the raw material. The second piece, we went thinking about the process parameters. And those process parameters, you have agitation rate, you have the dissolved oxygen. This is stuff, again, thinking about it at one point, human is good. What was your maximum dissolved oxygen? But thinking about it in a time series way, how you increase the temperature from 30 to 35. And it took, I don't know, an hour. But how that curve look like? Do you have any variation going up and down? Those are the things that the machine is really good at and picking up, while the human is not very intuitive for human. That's where we start like, hey, this AI can help a lot here, even better than human, where the data is getting a little more convoluted. It become a time series, become a graph, and you need to apply different techniques to getting that. And immediately we had a few offers like, hey, if you change this supplier to this one with this specification, you're going to get like a 5%, 6% higher yield. And we are talking on this is what we did. That was on a scale-up production of vaccines. We work on a vaccine production site. We offered a few changes and they immediately get 5-6% improvement on yield, which is very unheard of in these days. And the word that we focus on is like where the data is available, human is not really good, but the AI can be super useful.
Yeah, this is a really good point, Reza, because it reminded me of a tech transfer project I was part of many years ago. And it was so hard to pick up why we saw different behaviors. We were transferring a process from one side to another, and we looked at every single detail to make sure it was produced exactly the same way, but the performance was different. And if I remember correctly, it was one quality attribute that was different. And it took us many, many months to figure it out. And I think AI would have helped us to see the pattern much quicker and to understand where the problem is coming from. Well, long story short, it was because of the light, which had an impact on the media. You never think about that. And this just completely changed the process. So I think that's where AI definitely will make a huge difference in the raw material side. And there are so many different parameters. And then I have another question because you already mentioned that quickly, the scale up. That's also a big challenge. How do you see AI helping us here to overcome the scale up challenges?
That's a very good question. I was talking to another expert at work at one of the big pharma, and if we reached that point, as I've overseen dozens and dozens of scale up process. And he told me, he's like, I swear in my lab, I've never seen a scale up process goes in the year they promised that the scale up process is going to go. It's not a matter of like missing a day or two or like a week or two. I've never seen, like I work here for 20 years, never seen a scale up process go in a year that we promised that goes. Yeah.
That's quite accurate. Yes.
So what is the issue? The issue is you develop your processes. I'm making an example, like a 5 liter, and you're going to go on a 200 liter tank. Just the pressure difference on the top of like a big bioreactor on the bottom, that's unpredictable. This is not like I developed it here, it's going to work there. So the way that kind of the AI works, it needs to know two things: how the biomanufacturing on a scale works, how the biomanufacturing of this specific vector works. So if it sees both of them and sees enough tech transfer, it starts growing this intuition to what are the things that need to be changed. So it's like you're getting a vector and zooming in, and it knows how exactly which element zooms in. And we are going to see more and more of that. The AI going to be more helpful. And this is where actually the most expensive people are. That's a scale-up process. You really need the people. That's where the lack of talent exists. Because when people come out of universities, like a lot of them have experience working with the lab. Then you go, hey, working on a smaller scale, again, like you see a drop. But how many people seeing the largest scale manufacturing? How many process developer has seen it? Not so many. So the issue that comes is not only we don't know how that scale up works and AI could be helpful. The other thing is you are solving the issue of the talent. How many people understand this situation? That if that wouldn't be a problem, how many more people can do it at the end of the day? So it's the issue of efficiency, but also I would say argue the talent pool doesn't exist.
So this means, correct me if I'm wrong, Reza, but it sounds more like a partnership between AI and experienced scientists or engineers to do scale up, right?
That would be it. So yeah, exactly. Hopefully that become more and more AI. But what we are saying, in a smaller scale, we can do it full AI. In the scale up process, we still need that partnership going on, because the number of examples until the AI sees enough a scale up process is going to take a good amount of time.
Yeah, and I think that's a limitation there because you need a lot of data sets to train the model, and it's hard to do a lot of scale-ups because they're expensive.
They're very expensive, but hopefully the prices start dropping down. That's where we are focusing on. And the other thing is, this is a kind of an argument we are thinking, and we are talking to a few other friends that are working in this space. We are getting to a space that we can have a tabletop full automated fermentation. If I can do that, and I can do that pretty cheap, do I need a 5,000 liter tank, or I can get 500 of those, a small one? I'll control it. I want to scale it up, I can scale it up. I want to scale it down, I can scale it down. Demand goes up. It's full. Now you have a fully flexible. You have one batch goes wrong, 5 liter goes wrong, not 5,000. So if we reach to that level of automation, I would argue, do we really need to do that? Probably not. So my hope is that instead of solving that scale up, which AI could be helpful, rather than that, think about it as a full distributed scale up production. Instead of buying the most expensive CPUs, you buy a lot of them. And that's actually what happened in computation. Before that, we only have a single thread computation. That was the CPUs, like one single thread. And GPUs came in. And GPUs, it was interesting because they were using it for processing pictures. Each calculation was small. So instead of having one very strong core, it had 300, 400 smaller core. And that's actually now whole AI is running on GPUs. So can we do the same thing in biomanufacturing rather than having these big tanks that the pressure on top and the bottom is different? If something goes wrong, you hear that. It's like, oh, each batch would cost $10 million, $5 million. You need to throw everything out. We don't know what went wrong. The root causes, like analysis of it would be so hard to figure out. We have 500 of this cheap, small one, and there you can do everything on that. I think that's the future of biomanufacturing rather than these big and nasty ones that even if you want to change something, you need to tear down a building to change anything on that facility.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, obviously, a large-scale facility has a lot of advantages, especially on the cost side, but definitely the flexibility is a huge issue. And it's very difficult to run and operate and even build a large-scale facility. So if we can come up with more flexible, easier to use systems, I would also see a huge saving and also a huge risk reduction with these systems in the future. And that concludes part 1 of our fascinating discussion with Reza Farahani about AI in bioprocess development. Join us next time as we explore leadership principles in biotech startups and crucial advice for scientists considering entrepreneurship. Before we wrap up, are you struggling with bioprocess development and manufacturing challenges? I offer personalized 60-minute strategy sessions to help you optimize your development process and accelerate market entry. As a bioprocess consultant with over 15 years of experience, I've helped numerous companies create clear commercialization roadmaps. Visit BrühlmannConsulting.com to book your session. All right, smart scientists. That's all for today on the Smart Biotech Scientist Podcast. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on your journey to bioprocess mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, we can empower more scientists like you. For additional bioprocessing tips, visit us at smartbiotechscientist.com. Stay tuned for more inspiring biotech insights in our next episode. Until then, let's continue to smarten up biotech.